Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out.
Peter, welcome to the World XP podcast. It's great to have you on. I've been super interested in nutrition, I guess, recently. And then when you messaged me, I was kind of like, well, this works out quite nicely. So for those listening who don't know you or what you do, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can just jump right into it because I'm getting ahead of myself already, but I have lots of questions for you. So
yeah, cool. So I'm Peter. I own a business called Condition Nutrition. So I work predominantly with combat sports athletes. I've got guys in the UFC, One Championship, got a couple of boxers too. And my job, probably in a nutshell, is to get them on weight as safely and as healthy as possible, and also give them enough fuel to perform training optimally and also for competition.
There you go. So for those listening, and for you, maybe if you've seen, I've had two fighters and like a combat sports performance coach on very recently. And one of the things I was asking, I'm always curious, is, so my brother-in-law wrestled in college, and he would always talk to me about the weight cuts being like brutal, and like how people would do the like plastic bags in the sauna and all this like crazy stuff. And then I talked to like the MMA fighters, and they're like, no, we got more time. And the one specifically is like, I'm just training year round. So like my fighting, it's not that big of an issue. It's basically just like really buckled down the last like 2 months, and it's like not so bad. Yeah. But the flip side to that is like, you want to make sure that they're still properly fueled when they're cutting, because obviously you don't want them to be fighting under, like, you want them to be in the best physical condition they can be in, but also like if they are carrying too much weight, you want to make sure like all the weight is like what it's supposed to be. And you don't like, there's not really room for not essential like weight on there. So like, how do you go about doing that? That's been something that, and when I talked to the MMA doc as well, he was kind of like, I guess he didn't want to give up the trade secrets or whatever. So I was like, oh. But how does, like, when you're working with the fighters, how do you go about doing that?
Well, I think it's very important. Also, like, to rewind it back a bit, unfortunately, with the combat sports space, there's not a lot of research out there. So it's relatively new, the research that is coming out. So a lot of the nutrition advice has always been passed down from, coach did it this way and the coach did it that way. And when you wanted to, if you want to look, for example, a soccer player, nutritional recommendations, there's been research going on for years. So now, fortunately, there's a lot more research coming out in the combat sports space. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why there's been a lot of, as you mentioned before, the plastic suits in the sauna and all stuff like that. That's just been passed down from generation to generation. I think the most important thing when someone starts off with me or comes to me and says, hey, Peter, I've got a fight in 8 weeks, for example, I've got to be X amount. We really want to know what's under the hood, so to speak. So we really want to know their body composition. And the most important reason for that is, can they actually make that weight? I've had numerous conversations with coaches and fighters and go, oh, what, I compete at this weight class. Okay, why? Oh, because the coach told me to. But they're walking around very, very lean, which means that they haven't cut a large amount of weight, which then means they have to do aggressive diets and also aggressive dehydration methods to get that final weight off. So firstly, is getting that body composition assessment. So we go, okay, right, we know that we can safely get to that weight. Also getting some health markers like a blood test. So I'll give an example. This is also to address any nutritional deficiencies. So I've had fighters in the past who've signed up. I've mentioned being fatigued throughout the day, throughout training, and I've pressurized them, said, let's get a blood test. They pushed it off. And then they eventually got a blood test. We found out they're iron deficient. So obviously that influences the nutritional strategies then. So it's always important to get them baseline assessments for the fighter, and then we can work a plan from then. So say, I'll give two scenarios where fighter A is 80 kilos, but he competes at 70, but he's walking around at 15% body fat. But then fighter B, the same weight, but he's under 10%, he's 8%. It's going to be a lot harder for fighter B to get down to that weight because he hasn't got any weight to go, any weight to lose. It's just going to tap into his muscle, and then it's going to affect his strength, his power, which are all important attributes for a fighter. So really getting them two baseline assessments to work a plan through then, and but unfortunately, a lot of fighters just compete at a weight class which they don't know if their body's optimal for that weight class.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I hadn't even considered that, but it makes total sense. I've thinking about how like my own, like about 2 years ago or so during COVID, I was kind of considering if I wanted to pursue professional soccer. So I was in Mexico for a little bit and then on trial with a few various teams, and the weight, like the number. So I don't know what this would be in kilos, but like I sit around like 170, low 170s or so for pounds.
Yeah.
And when I went to do, like, I joined the gym and they did like a complimentary like body composition thing where you stand on the thing and hold the thing on the side.
Yeah.
And I think I was at like 10% body fat or whatever. And I hadn't really been, I hadn't been buckling down basically. So like I had still had some to lose, but then that number, like I'm not lean naturally. So I look at somebody else who's like my height's like 5'10" and they're sitting at like 160 or 155. And I'm like, damn, how do I lose that extra? And then what you said is like, there's not really that much room for me to go. Like when I was in Mexico, I think I was like 168. So it's like, that's probably without me losing muscle.
Yeah.
That's probably like, there's not really much further down to go. So when you're working with fighters, how where's that line? Because the weight classes obviously differ for various sports, but in my recollection, they're not normally more than like 8 pounds or so between the classes. So like that's not that much. So like for me, if I wake up and I'm like 171 or whatever, and then at the end of the day I'm like 173 or 4, like that's a third of a weight class, just like fluctuation throughout the day, just from eating and stuff. So how do you make that determination? Because like the margins are very small.
Well, also you got to take into account the weight cutting history. Have they cut large amounts in there to get to that weight, to say, even if they are what would be classed as an optimal body composition, what methods are they doing? Are they cutting 10% of the body weight to get to that weight class? Then you've got to look at the history, see how they've got down to that weight. And also it depends with different sports too, because I work quite a lot of Thai boxers, so the weight classes sometimes vary between 2-3 kilos, so there's a massive jump. So then you can have that discussion in terms of going, okay, well maybe it's better to move an upper weight class, but then sometimes it's a little bit of a different conversation, especially in MMA, where lightweight to welterweight is 7 kilos. So you having that conversation with the fighter and coach can be sometimes challenging, because for example, when I first started off and I've got my nutrition health hat on and I say to a coach, I don't think this guy can long-term compete at this weight class. Sometimes the comment back is, fuck you, basically. Like this is the weight he competes at. So but I always say to a fighter, look, yeah, you may be able to get down to that weight a couple of times, but doing that continuously throughout your career is just not good for your health. And you've got to look at your career and your health they've got to be aligned. It's not just your career and then you finish, then you've now got to focus on your health. You've got to them two things together. And yeah, it's reviewing the weight cutting history and dietary practice, what they've done before. And if they cut massive amounts of weight on fight week, or they cut massive amounts of water weight, that's when you say, okay, maybe we need to talk about a different weight class.
So how much then? So let's say we'll throw a scenario out there. Let's say they've cut a bunch of water weight the week of the fight, and you're like, all right, next time they're gonna go up a weight class.
Yeah.
How much do they lose then? Or not lose, but like then you get into like the power versus speed type thing. Like if they put on extra like 5-6 pounds of muscle, and then because you hear like just the talking heads on TV, you're like, wow, he lost all that speed when he jumped up to such and such weight class, and he's not used to the power that so and so is going to throw at him, and he's going to be at a big disadvantage, yada yada. And for me, never being a fighter, like Manny, the one fighter I had on, I think he's fighting at like 145. So for me, that's like way. So for me, the difference between like 170 and 177 or whatever on the soccer field, it was in terms of throwing your weight around, is like not that big of a difference. But I would imagine 145 versus like 135 is a massive difference. So like, how do you kind of go about that conversation? Because the fighter would then have to adjust, especially if, depending on what their body type is, if they're naturally leaner or thicker, then you have to like they'd have to adjust to like the new, however, like, would they have to add things into their fighting style or change things, or like, how does that sort of go? Because in my head, I'm like, that all seems very complicated. If they're used to fighting at one weight that maybe isn't optimal for their body type, but the way they fight, it makes more sense. Like, how does that all?
I think also you've got to take into account, because the sport's multifaceted, you got to get the structured S&C program up. You've got to have them conversations with the whole team. You can't just be like, there's your nutrition man, this is your weight class, etc., and then leaving to. You've got to really tweak it around the training schedule, and you know, S&C is a big thing now, which wasn't a big thing in the combat sports space. And having them conversations where the training adaptations and the periodized training programs are happening. But I've seen instances with, I had a fighter who, before he signed up with me, was really, really struggling to get at his weight class. He made the decision to move up, and it's gone from the start of camp being a quote unquote fat camp where the whole focus is getting the weight down, to now he's focusing more on skill development, as S&C side of things. And it just takes that load off. And this is like, I'll make a note now, like, not every fighter will do this. And sometimes the conversation has gone, you know, they don't want to do that, and the coach has made the decision. We've had to carry on with the weight class they compete at. But then you've just got to, this where it comes in this conversation where they've got to be more prepared all year round. So they can't just finish a fight, go and fuck off somewhere, eat a load of food, go on holiday, balloon up and weight, and then that cycle comes again. It's having that conversation with, right, you finish your fight now, let's not go overboard, let's stick to some kind of structure, so then when you do get a fight announced, you're not cutting massive amounts of weight again. So it's about the education side of things too.
Yeah, that makes sense. As you said, the S&C side is new. Like, to me, that doesn't even compute like why it's new. Like, for somebody to go into like, okay, now I'm going to prepare for a fight, and the first thing I have to do is lose all this weight. It's like, why were you not? I don't, like, as a soccer player, you're in shape all the time, basically.
Yeah.
Like, you have 1 month off during the summer, basically, and then you kind of like, even that month off isn't really like, you're still doing stuff. You're just not. So when you're like, oh, it's instead of like when somebody told me that their camp was losing weight and getting in shape, I was like, why is your camp not preparing for the, like, what the guy is doing? Like, for me, that being new is like, seems very weird to me. Like, obviously they'll do some tactical stuff during camp, but like, that's the whole point of you're getting prepared for, like, I don't know. It just like is very foreign to me that it's new. So like, what was going on in the fight? What was going on in the fight, the fighting sphere of preparation, where it was more like the losing weight side of things? Like, because that's all you hear from fight camps. It's like it's grueling because they need to like make weight and all these other things. And then having talked to you for this and then the other people, I'm like, why would they not just do it beforehand? But then I also don't know the physical damage that is taken during, well, depending on how the fight goes, of course. They need time off to recover and things like that. But
well, I think also, I remember a podcast. There's a guy I work with in the university in Perth, Australia. He's like an expert in combat sports, like research and hydration, etc. And he mentioned on the podcast, like, problem with fighters, they finish the fight, they go off for a couple of months, and then they get back into camp again. But you wouldn't see, for example, a marathon runner going, oh, the Olympics is in 6 months, better start training. It's an all year round development. It's constant training adaptations and body composition, you know, targets and stuff like that. And I think that's where it comes back to the conversation in combat sports, is because the research is so new. all the advice is just passed down from gym to gym, and this gym did it this way, and John in the gym who competed for 30 years did it this way, but he's got no nutritional qualifications, but it worked for him. And I think I think luckily now that the more research is coming out, the UFC PI is putting out good research, and the space and people working in this area is growing. So I think in 10, 15 years time, you will see less of an emphasis. Oh, I finished the fight, go on holiday, balloon up in weight, start the camp again, fat camp, drop a massive amount of weight. And more fighters are having a full team around them. So they're not just working with the coach. They've got a nutritionist, they've got an S&C coach, they've got a physio, they've got a chiro, they've got that whole team around them. And especially at the elite level now, it's shocking. The guys I've worked with who have been multiple world champions, who've only just started working with a nutritionist, and they've been fighting for 15 years. It's like either guy's had 100 odd fights and he's only had a nutritionist with me in the past year. And it's crazy to see, like, and he's never missed weight or anything like that, but it goes from the conversation of, yeah, these people never miss weight, but could they make the weight more optimally? So it's it's a constant battle for me when a guy finishes a fight and says, look, like, let's not go overboard, let's go enjoy yourself, let's get back to it. And it's always like the text messages 1 week post, right? Hello, you're right, like, what have you been doing? Oh, Peter, I went out for a few family meals, and I'm back to it next week. But it's yeah, I think that the most important thing is just educating the fighters on the downsides, the balloon up in weight, and the benefits to sticking to an optimal body composition all the year round. Yeah. And also waffling on a little bit here, but like also the psychological side of things, I can understand. You've been in the camp for, say, if it's a big world title fight, win, lose or draw, it's a big psychological burden on you. So say you do lose the fight. I've never been in that situation. I've never fought competitively. So it can take, I can imagine, to take a massive toll on you, and you do want to have that blowout and go and do whatever. So at the same time, you got to have them personal skills where you sort of understand the fighter. I think a lot of people think a nutritionist is just a guy with a notepad, geek, eat your broccoli and vegetables. And I try and I'm just a normal guy who's got ended up in this space, and I try and have that human interaction, just to understand that these guys are human beings, they're not robots. You can't just feed them broccoli and rice and leave them to it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's been times for sure, like after long seasons or whatever, that I wanted to be like, well, let me just not eat healthy and do whatever. But then, like, after a day or two of it, it's like, this doesn't feel very good. So like I just don't want to do it anyways. Like, I'm at that point. Oh, you said something. Oh yeah. So when you're talking about like the elite levels having these teams around them, there's guys that are wanting to go pro that don't really have the resources to have that sort of team. And what's interesting to me, and you find this in soccer as well, is that there's like certain kind of baseline rules that are generally good for most people, like 99% of people, to follow. And then you get to that point where you're jumping from like the 95% to the 100. Like, so like the guy that you were talking about earlier that's been world champion multiple times, always made weights. And you're like, well, you can optimally like get to that body weight. But there's so many people that don't have the resources to do that. And it's very difficult, because you talk to somebody like MMA Doc or any of these other people, like, you guys have a level of expertise that is worth whatever your rates are and whatever you charge, because you've gone to school and done all the research and gone to all the conferences and like have the expertise to do it. And I wonder I'm gonna combine that with another thing. So like the amount of like really bad injuries that we've been seeing like the Conor McGregor leg break, Harvey Elliott last year broke his leg. Like, the athletes are getting stronger and faster and more powerful, and the injuries are getting, it seems to me, right, I have no evidence to back this up, but anecdotally it seems like they're getting worse and more frequent. And so when you get these fighters that are at like peak condition because they've got these teams around them, and then you've got somebody trying to break into, like, I feel like that gap is going to get a little bit bigger from like the 95% to like the 100% because of the science and the resources available. Have you seen that, or what are your thoughts on that sort of thing? Because I've been seeing it with soccer, like an amateur goes into a pro team for a trial and they're just not there, and it's not because the gap is starting to, like, because every day these guys have the nutritionists and they're like, they've got their like optimal, they've done the blood test, so after practice they've got their juice with the right amount of nutrients for that specific player, and like some amateur has no, like, they don't have the time nor the resources to do that. And I feel like it's a bit, I don't know, like it just is, I don't, like, have you seen that in the fighting world, or like what are your thoughts on that? Or like,
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. I think sometimes, especially, you probably know this in sport in general, sometimes talent can take you a little bit further than what you probably predicted without a structured nutrition strategy.
mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot more people in this space now, and there's a lot of good researchers posting things out on social media. Like, I regularly post things on my page, and I think people, if people can't afford to, some amateur and they can't afford services, I think if you look in the right places, you can seek out that information. And also with amateurs who are in a gym and they've got someone who trains in their gym, and they're at a quote unquote higher level, even just picking the brains of people like that. I think, yeah, that's actually a very good question in terms of where would that sort of gap be closed? Yeah, I don't think I can give you a definitive answer.
Yeah,
But
well, it depends on each athlete and what sort of research they can do. But there's a certain level of, like, I can eat pretty well for myself. But if I was to hire you, you probably would tweak this and tweak that and be like, don't put so much cheese on your eggs, and like do like this thing and that thing. And there's like that, like, there's only so far that I can take myself. And it's not really how do you close the gap, but it's just like, what are you seeing within the space? Because there's opportunities to, right, because at the end of the day you can't put too much on your page because you have a business to run. So it's just a interesting, like, sort of situation I think we found ourselves in, and I haven't really thought about it. I just hearing you talk before, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I wanted to see what you think about it. There's not really a question there, I guess. It's just like, what are your thoughts on it? Because I'm sure you've seen, right, you've worked with somebody who's a world champion, and then also you've seen amateur fighters who maybe the talent can bridge that gap for them. But also, like, what if there's somebody who maybe with that right nutrition could go from like borderline amateur pro to world champion, but like kind of because the top end is getting so much, the top end is getting so much better, like it's kind of, I don't know, it's interesting, like, where the world is moving in sport, because every soccer team has sports scientists and data analytics and all this stuff now, and you listen to like the old guys, like the pundits talk now, and they're like, well, we just had like a 12-pack of beer on the bus after our game, and like now that would never ever happen. So
I think I was going to say something, my mind's just gone blank, but I think if you are a fighter that's amateur and you are looking to take that next level, sometimes it may take a bit of an investment into, an S&C coach or nutrition, and it's very easy said than done, because obviously people's financial situations everyone's different. But I think if you want to take things seriously, this is where I say it's about when people ask about the body composition assessments and the blood, is like, if you want to see how far you can go in the sport, sometimes you need to make them investments. And we're not talking thousands of months, but I think it's just how serious you want to pursue the sport. And I think if you want to do something sometimes you can make adjustments to get that done. It's probably a bit of a bad answer for that, but see, like if you're
No,
really
you're
serious
right,
and
though.
passionate, it's like I feel like, so I've had coaches when they've messaged me and said, I had a guy here, he's only a young lad, but he's just absolutely stuck with his nutrition. Like, can you give some guidance or some kind of plan? Doesn't have to be your plan that you have with the world champions, or some kind of structure that we can follow for a couple of months. And this, when it goes back into, there's definitely people out there that can cater for that. But yeah, it all goes back into if you want to be serious in the sport, sometimes you have to make an investment.
Yeah. No, you're 100%. That's exactly right. The flip side to that question is for like somebody who wants to do a sport, but maybe they know they're not going to go pro or whatever. How much of a difference? And I know the answer is going to be it depends, but how much of a difference? Like if you've got somebody that is an amateur level player and they're kind of a fighter and they're eating generally along the right guidelines, let's say, like how much of a difference does the like break down from the science? Because there's people like, so for me, where I'm at in my life, the investment in time that it would take to like go through all the numbers and like get everything like perfectly right is not worth the like that little bump in performance that I would get. But like that little, like I'm not trying really to, like I have got a job and a wife, like I'm not going to travel to like somewhere in the middle of the US to make whatever for a year. Like that's not where I'm at in my life. So for people, that's sort of the dilemma that or not dilemma. That's the thing that I've been thinking about when because people ask me like, oh, how do you eat? And I'm like, I don't know. I just get salads instead of fries at restaurants. Like, I don't like, it's not rocket science here. And then there's people like you who are like, well, if you've got this level of this nutrient, that level of that nutrient, and we can adjust this thing. And there's a whole like level of science behind it that seems like almost not applicable to regular people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like my father-in-law is like, oh, I want to lose weight, and I'm like, I don't, just put less butter in your food. Like I don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the good thing about fighters is because they train with a team, they train in the gym. There's going to be someone, if you're an amateur, there's always someone in that group of fighters who's pretty like on it with the nutrition. They don't work with anyone. Like I've been into gyms and like there's John who's like follows his macros every day and he has this plan and he does his own research. So I think the good thing about a fighter is that they're not on their own. They can go to in their gym. There's always going to be someone who has some kind of, that's what from my experience at all the gyms that I've been to, even gyms across the world, Thailand, Singapore, Dubai, the UK, there's always somebody in that gym who has some kind of knows roughly what to eat, and then they can use that as sort of a guide and light. I've never really been in the gym where everyone's been eating McDonald's and Burger Kings for the diet plan.
Everyone's clueless.
There's always that kind of OCD person who's like, yeah, follow everything like to the gram, like the sauce. I won't put 30 grams of sauce and I'll measure it out. So I think that's for an amateur. If you're in a good gym, you're not alone in. It's not, for example, if you were this might be a really bad example. If you were a runner or a cyclist and you just ran on your own, like you've got no one around you to pick the brains off, what you eat, and then you're not really too sure what to eat, and then you're looking for the internet. I think with if you train in the gym, it's a big environment, and you can probably pick the brain off someone in there.
Yeah. How close are like if you go on the internet or like you follow or like you're in like you follow generally the right, like you're like, okay, I've eaten chicken and rice and broccoli for dinner, and then I had some eggs and a banana for breakfast, and then for lunch I had like some salmon and a salad or whatever. Like if you follow, like how close is that, like not counting the like number levels of nutrients involved, but like generally, if you, for like those listening, if you follow that generally, are you in a pretty good spot? So if you like generally try and eat like that, and that's kind of a good baseline
Well, I think the most important thing, if you're eating that kind of food, you're being more aware of what you're eating. So you're really halfway there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're like, oh, I'm having lots of vegetables and eating lean meats and having lots of fruit, some good carbohydrates, you're near enough there, really. Like in terms of like if you're a fighter or you're training, sometimes it might just take having that meal a couple hours before or a couple hours after. Like I'd say generally, if you're doing that, you're being aware, you're being conscious, you're being aware of what foods are, I'd say quote unquote healthy. So you're moving in the right direction, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what athletic greens is?
Yes, I remember Joe Rogan mentioned it years ago on his
Yeah.
podcast.
Do you know enough to have thoughts on that you would want to say, or?
I don't actually know too much about it. I did look into it years ago, but I think a lot of things with like supplements like that, it's always a food first approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's when you're looking for, a supplement is something to supplement your diet. Certain supplements, performance wise are a little bit different, but if the main focus is to get that food from your diet first, and if you're really struggling to do that and there's barriers there, that's when you could potentially look into things like that. But I think the big thing with people is the pyramid of what's important. People, food and quality, fruit and vegetables, etc., should be the foundation, and supplements is the cherry on top. People's things are switch. We're like, well, I'm having all these supplements. What's your diet? I don't know. Yeah, follow it. I go out a couple of times a week, go for a drink, but I have all these supplements and I spend loads on it. And I think that's an unfortunate thing about the supplement industry. It's such big. It's a massive industry, and people get like, a lot of my job is convincing guys like, no, don't take that supplement. Like, for example, I had a guy messaging me before, just signed up with me, said, oh, my mate sent me this website and all these supplements I should be taking, and which one should I order? And I clicked on the website and there wasn't one supplement which I would recommend it to him, and all the supplements are there. I was looking, I was like, no idea what that does, that's a load of crap, and all these supplements are like crazy expensive. $150, and it's educating people to food first, and then if a supplement is needed, that's when we can look into supplements. But when guys ask me how many supplements should I take, I literally 4. They're the main ones. Like whey protein, if you're struggling to get enough protein in your diet, creatine monohydrate, because creatine is quite difficult to get. If you're a meat eater, you can get creatine in your diet, but not the recommended amount for the performance effect. Fish oils, because they have anti-inflammatory properties, omega-3 fish oils, and there's been some research that have shown that can help reduce muscle soreness in rugby players, because they're doing a lot of hits, a lot of so in terms of a fighter, that would make some sense to use that. And beta-alanine, which is basically, beta-alanine is a buffer. So when you perform any type of high intensity activity, you get the buildup of quote unquote lactic acid. So what beta-alanine does is helps delay the buildup of that, so you can perform that high intensity activity. Might be 1 or 2% longer, or you might delay fatigue a little bit longer. But they're the main supplements I recommend, and anything else is really, if we really need to add that into the diet, or there's a barrier where we can't get that from food, that's when I include other things.
I have 2 questions, and I want to come back to the creatine one. But like something like a magnesium or vitamin D and zinc, we've heard a lot about that, obviously, with COVID and some of the health stuff that's been going on. Where is that sort of in people that you work with, or what you've seen, like the benefits of magnesium? Because I've heard things about it, and I'm like, okay, like I have no way, I can read stuff, but I have no way to verify, like, for myself. So like, what are your thoughts on things like that? Because we have here at the house like a magnesium, zinc, and vitamin D sort of like vitamin type supplement-y thing?
Yeah, I don't typically recommend the magnesium and the zinc. The vitamin D, I do, especially in winter months, especially in the northern hemisphere where the light hours are quite short. And they're the really ones to mainly focus on, because a lot of the zinc and magnesium you can get from foods.
Mm-hmm.
But vitamin D is typically ones, especially in the winter months, because there's been research that has shown with like soccer players, they examine the vitamin D status in the winter months compared to the summer months, and some of them were classed as vitamin D deficient.
Mm.
So that's important in winter months. But yeah, yeah, but as I said, mainly a food first approach before we go into.
Yeah. So what is because I've seen a lot of people saying not just that you need to take magnesium via supplement, but people just need more of it in their diets generally. Like, what does magnesium and zinc, like, what do these things do for the body? Because like I don't know, I think most people listening, myself included, hear these things and I'm like, okay, like hear from somebody like you, okay, need more vitamin D. It's like, okay, well, sure, I'll do that. But what does that actually do? Like, what do these things do for even the ones that you mentioned, obviously the omega-3s and the 4 you mentioned before, but like, what are some of these other things, like benefits for the body?
Well, things like zinc have been helped with sleep. In terms of vitamin D, that's also important for bone health. So this is a caveat where a lot of people don't have enough calcium in the diet. So you can get a thing called scurvy, which is a bit of an effect on the bone. So it can have negative effects on the bone health. So with this is one of the things where people say, oh, what as you said, like, what's the benefits of magnesium, zinc, and you can roll off a lot of like arbitrary terms, and people are like, okay, that it can help with like the nervous system, with sight. Vitamin D can also help with muscle regeneration. So there's been research that have shown that after like muscle damage and exercise, vitamin D can help basically the regrowth of the muscle. So yeah, it's a lot of people mention about zinc for sleep, but the thing is with that, there's not concrete evidence with that. Don't get me wrong, if someone was taking it, it's not going to have any negative side effects.
Mm.
But it's the same with a lot of supplements. If someone's taking it and they've got a jar of it in the house, they've already purchased the supplement. Is it going to do any harm taking it? No. But will I recommend buying that again? Possibly not. But yeah, it's my main thing is just making sure you have a well balanced diet and you can hit them micronutrients with food. And then, yeah, as I said, just going into if that can be done as a barrier where, you know, time wise, because sometimes this is a big thing for fighters too, is these guys have got families, they train 3 times a day. It's really important to make sure the meals are also nutritious, but they're good enough, they're easy enough for them to prepare, to take around with them when they're training and stuff. So it's really dialing in on all them things so they can hit them targets.
Mm-hmm. I've seen some stuff about creatine recently. A friend
Yeah.
of mine who's in the S&C space, mostly with soccer players, mentioned it to me very recently, and hearing creatine before was always in the context of like American football players want to get jacked. So I like kind of just stayed, like I was like, nah, whatever, like I don't.
Yeah.
But now I'm seeing more right in the creatine monohydrate form that it seems to have a lot more benefits, and you mentioned it as one of the 4 things that you would recommend people take. So like, what is it and what does it do for people and why do you recommend it?
So one of our energy systems is the phosphocreatine energy systems that produces ATP energy in really high intensity movements, really short duration high intensity movements. So supplement with creatine will increase your creatine stores, therefore allow you to potentially perform that activity longer and delay fatigue. So creatine's probably the most researched supplements. Like I think it is probably the most researched supplements. I think the first study was like in the 1800s, and it's been well researched to show that it can improve performance in like high intensity sports, like things like sprinting, football, soccer. There's been stuff on creatine with brain health too. So there's also a lot of research coming out now with creatine. Is actually, because creatine stored in the muscle, 99% of it is typically stored in the muscle, but also the brain has creatine. So there's been studies that have shown that creatine can help with improving your memory and cognitive function, especially in fatigue demanding tasks. There was a study with rugby players where they had to do like a passing accuracy test, and they performed the game, then they did the test. So obviously they're going to be a little bit fatigued, passing might be a bit off, and it showed that the creatine supplementation actually helped with the accuracy in that test. So I always recommend creatine to fighters, because I look at the scenario where, you know, you're in the latter rounds of a fight, fatigue's kicking in. If you've got a supplement which may, you know, keep you switched on that little bit more, that could be the difference between you scoring the round strongly or finishing the round strongly. So there's a lot of benefits in terms of the muscle and performance side, where it can help with, you know, performance. Can also help with the increase of muscle mass too, but it also can help the cognitive side of things. So it's got a double whammy.
Mm-hmm.
But a big thing, I don't know if you've heard of this before, a lot of fighters get scared of the thought of creatine because there's an associated water retention if you're taking it. So
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so a lot of fighters are scared to take it because there's initial research that had shown that when you take creatine, you hold on to water. So fighters, they're cutting weight. Anything that holds on to weight or puts on weight, it's like, shit, we don't want to do that. And it was initial study. Have you taken creatine before?
No.
So with creatine, there was thought to be initial loading phase to get into the muscle. So around 20 grams a day for 7 days, and then a maintenance dose of around 3 to 5 grams. So initially, this study, participants took 20 grams a day for 7 days, and their body weight increased by around a kilo. But it was obviously through water weight. So fighters thinking, oh, this is it now. We don't want to take creatine because it's bad. But now a lot of research has come out now to show that you don't actually hold on to water with creatine. It makes sense that you hold on to water with creatine, because creatine is what's called a osmotically active substance. So when creatine goes into the muscle, it draws water into the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So that would, in theory, increase your water weight, technically body weight. But as I said, the research has shown that it doesn't increase your body weight by that much. And if it does, that's not a bad thing, because water in the muscle is actually important for the growth of the muscle. So I always say to guys with creatine, if you're that focused on you may get a slight increase in body weight at the start of taking it, but then that levels out. But if you're that concerned about a little bit of increase in weight, you've got bigger issues to worry about with your nutrition. You've got to focus on other things. And the benefits far outweigh the potential slight increase in water weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's the reason I asked, because I was considering trying it just to see how, because I'm at the sort of phase where, like, for my own performance, like, I don't necessarily need that like bump for the leagues that I'm playing in and stuff. But I train people in soccer, and sometimes I get questions like that. So kind of like, not to like experiment on myself, but also to experiment on myself and just see how it went.
I think the thing with supplements as well, everyone seems to think they'll take a supplement and they'll go from like a normal fighter to some elite fighters by taking creatine.
Yeah,
it
never works like that.
All these supplements are just like 1-2% improvements, which, especially in that elite level, could be, as I mentioned before, about the stuff with creatine in the brain, that 1-2% improvement, that's where the fine margins lie in that elite level.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same way for all, like, every sport. And I tell people this often who are like asking me questions about different things. I'm like, once you get up to that level, the differences between those players are so small that like it's hard to, if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you can't even tell most of the time. I had another, what was I going to ask? Oh yeah. So the food pyramid, that was from like when I was growing up in like the 90s or whatever. Lots of people, I think, still not as much as like late 90s, early 2000s when my parents would be like, yeah, have you gotten all the things on the pyramid? And like now we know it's like doesn't really work that way. What are things that I guess what are the biggest misconceptions that you see when you talk with somebody for the first time and they're like, oh, I'm eating this thing because isn't it good for this? And you're like, no, 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 no. That's not actually how that works. What are the biggest sort of like misconceptions, misnomers, things that you see that you've seen?
That's a good question. I think one of them is people think, say for example, oh, I'm eating salmon. Salmon's really healthy, isn't it? Yeah. And then they're complaining that they're not losing any weight. But there's a difference between eating healthy, but then you still have to be conscious of how many calories they're having. And then you'll have, 3 pieces of salmon for dinner and some avocado and some nuts, for example. Like, look, man, I was like, that's going up to a pretty high calorie meal. So I think people tend to think, oh, that's healthy. You still want, if you're looking to, lose weight or improve your body composition, you still got to focus on, the calories in, calories out. So that's one sort of distinguishing. Yeah, you're eating healthy, but you still need to be conscious of how much you're eating. I think a lot of things with my job in like the sports nutrition world is supplements is a big thing. Like this supplement do this, or I shouldn't eat carbs at night. That's a big one. Eating carbs at night. Why? Because it puts on fat. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Or who told you that? Oh, it's just common knowledge. It's like, like where does this knowledge come from? And I'm trying to. There's definitely some in my head. I'm trying to think. No, there's carbs at night. Like not eating breakfast, things like that. Oh, I don't eat breakfast, not good for you. And then the times of eating. Oh, you're not meant to. People talking about intermittent fasting now, and oh, you shouldn't eat at this time because it's dangerous, blood glucose, and people relay all these arbitrary terms, and you think, where do these people get this information? Yeah, just Google, yeah. And the majority of my job is, especially with fighters, because especially in that even the sports space, there's that many myths around, and there's that many things that have been passed down. A lot of my job at the time is just myth busting. No, it'll happen like once a day. Like once a day, I'll be saying to someone, "No, that doesn't work. No, you can't have that." And I think that people tend to find food good or bad, and then that also causes a lot of eating disorders. I've worked with fighters who have had serious eating disorders because they've been that restricted with the food and think this is fine, this is good, this is bad. They've just become so OCD with the diet, and that's I've had a lot of instances where I've had to deal with fighters eating disorders from bad information passed down, and you just have to re-educate them. And I'm a very relaxed nutritionist where someone goes to me, oh, I'm going out tonight. Can I go out for food with my family? Yeah, okay. I'm like, do it, because if you're that restricted with food, you're gonna want to go out. If I said no, you're gonna be sitting there thinking, fuck, I'd love to like have that steak dinner tonight or something, and then that's gonna be on your mind, and you all week you'll be thinking, oh, this is shit. I haven't been able to eat anything like so for the past couple of weeks. And I think it's just a big psychological part of educating them and having that flexibility with that. I think that if you're consistent 80% of the time, we're on track. As long as the 80% mark, that's good.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing generally from people who are like, as long as you're pretty consistent, then like one day or whatever where you kind of aren't on it, it's like it's not gonna get rid of all the progress that you've made. Although on the flip side, it is very easy to destroy all the progress you've made in like a week or two.
Yeah. I think also what a big thing that happens with fighters or people in general who want to lose weight, etc. They'll have that meal out, but then say they go out for Italian food and they have lasagna and they wake up the next day and like, I'm 2 kilos heavier than I was yesterday. But they need to take into account that they've had carbohydrates, which hold on to water. They've had sodium, which holds on to water. So then that's where you need to educate the fighters and go, okay, you may be a little bit heavy the next day, but that's not actual like tissue weight. It's just going to be water weight. And
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing where people don't distinguish the difference between the two, where people weigh themselves after training and they'd be lighter and we go, okay, well, you haven't lost actual weight in that training session, you've just lost water. So when you drink that water, you're going to put that water back on. And it's just, it's as I said, my job is just literally just educating all the time.
There's one other question I had about just my own conceptions about things, and that's like water versus like electrolyte type things, like whether it's like I don't know if you know what's like BioSteel or like some of these, not like the old Gatorade, but like the electrolyte drinks and things like that.
Yeah.
At what, because sometimes I'm like, oh, water's so boring, so I'll like have water in a bottle and I'll put some like BioSteel in it. And I'm like, well, it's still water, so I'm still drinking water, and I justify it to myself like that. But what sort of benefits to both, not benefit, like where's, because I remember when I was very little, my mom didn't want to get any Gatorade or anything. She was like, no, you just need water. The doctor was like, well, you should probably like have some of both. So like, where is that basically the truth, some both, or like, because it's the same thing with like you were saying with supplements. It's like, well, if you get all that stuff from the diet, it's like, yeah, but is there a point where you like over I don't know, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think this is where the sports nutrition side comes in for the average person who's not training or just sedentary. Would take an electrolyte be particularly beneficial? Maybe if you're in a warm up, you do. So when you sweat, you lose water and electrolytes. So the emphasis for any kind of athlete is when you're doing the training session, you sweat, you're losing the water electrolytes. So you need to get them electrolytes back in. So what a lot of people do is, this happens a lot with fighters too when they've done a weight cut, is they'll just reintroduce water back into the body. So what ends up happening is you have an electrolyte balance in your body. When you sweat, you lose water and electrolytes, but you lose more water than electrolytes. So then if you just introduce pure water, you dilute the blood because you're not replacing them electrolytes. So what ends up happening is you end up, your kidneys go, oh, we're reacting to a bit of fluid overload here. So the kidneys end up like filtering that water out. You end up pissing the majority of that water out. So it's always important to, if you're doing a training session, is to add electrolytes to replace them electrolyte losses. And like sort of said about fighters will do a weight cut and then they finish the weigh and boom, 2-liter bottle of water, and they go in the toilet 30 minutes later because you're just not holding on to it. So it's something I always stress to me fighters is big training session, always have electrolyte, because we have tablets over here. They're called SIS gels. So literally just pop them in your water bottle. And then just simple. The sports drinks, in terms like Gatorades and stuff like that, they do have electrolytes, so they can replace it. Would I recommend having it all the time? No, but say you've got a back-to-back training session and you need to replace the fluids, but you also need a little bit of a carbohydrate boost, and you don't really want to have food because you don't want it to sit in your stomach. Something like a Gatorade is ideal. But for the general person who's just, someone who's not exercising, would I recommend having a Gatorade? Probably not. But that's where the crossover between like sports nutrition and health sort of crosses over a little bit. But yeah, electrolytes super important. Also, if you really want to be on top of things, if you're exercising, you could weigh yourself before. and weigh yourself after, and you'd always replace what you've lost by 1.5. So then you add the electrolytes in to replace the electrolytes lost in your sweat. And if you wanted to have your post-training meal, add a little bit of extra salt to the meal, and that can top up, will restore your electrolyte balance.
That makes sense. I hadn't heard that before. Though if you had to, for an athlete, and you're like, okay, the ideal sort of nutrient load for, let's say, I don't know, because it'll be different, but we'll say a baseline sort of like fighting is cardio intensive, and we'll say soccer training session, something that's more cardio intensive rather than like lifting heavy weights. If you were to recommend like you should eat this before and this after, or like what would be the recommendation from you?
So I think it goes in the continuum of what intensity the training session is. So say you're doing a low intensity, long duration activity, like a run, like a slow run. Is there a lot of emphasis for having carbohydrates before? Not really. So something like a low carb meal would be ideal for that. Maybe something like an omelette or a protein shake. But then if you're doing a hard sparring session, 2 hours plus, high intensity, you're going to be burning carbohydrates. We're going to have to fuel the body with that. So a couple hours before, well, about 3 hours before, if you want to have a meal, something like trying chicken rice type meal, lean meat, good carbs, white rice. And then, but say you didn't have time to do that, maybe like an hour or two before, have a sports drink, some jellies, maybe some fruit, just light snacks, just to give your body that fuel. But yeah, and it sort of in the continue of like a low intensity activity, the emphasis on carbohydrates is not that important. But then anything of the high intensity, that's when we really need to fuel, especially if the training session is to get the maximum power output. And then that training session, you want to train at your best. That's when you need to really place the emphasis on carbs.
That makes sense. Half of this I'm just asking to kind of for my own like habits and what I'm doing to like see if I'm on the right track. It seems like mostly I'm doing all right. I'm asked just one more question on diet stuff, and then I want to go into like the culinary school stuff because that's super interesting to me as well. There's been a lot of like diets kind of popping up in the mainstream, keto and paleo and all these things that are popping up. What are your thoughts on those sorts of like, well, I don't know if they're fad diets, but what are your thoughts on those generally? And also you hear people say like, oh, I've gone carnivore and it seems to have helped me with this thing, and I don't know.
I think for the general person, then diets might work, but if it fits around your lifestyle, the keto, carnivore, intermittent fasting may be great. But in terms of a context for my line of work, for the fighter, then diets just are not optimal. Especially, I could give an example of the ketogenic diet. So we speak about, ketogenic diet is high fat diet. Fighters, we're talking about the training session. The main fuel is carbohydrates. You're burning carbohydrate. Any high intensity activity, you're burning predominantly carbs. So if you're not having any carbs, your ability slowly to hit them high power outputs, which you typically do on a carbohydrate diet, will slowly diminish, and you're just not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to perform at a high intensity. I give an example of putting unleaded petrol into an F1 car. So the car's going to go around. The car's going to go, but it's going to run out of gas. Round the block. So I try and give that analogy to fighters where it's just not the diet for the fighter. And sometimes you get a bit of backlash. I've had, when I put posts out about the ketogenic diet, someone's gone, oh, I've used that for years, it's worked for me. And this is where, like, it's not like disrespectful to some people, but it's John, the white collar guy who's has a couple of fights for charity example. For an elite guy who's that, top of the game, the research on that diet is just not good enough. And I try and I'll give a diet for an amateur guy as much as I would for like the world champions that I've got. It's the same principles. Like, if someone said that eating pizzas 10 times a day will help a fighter improve performance by 20%. I'll be giving pizzas to all my fighters, but until the research is out there, then I'll stick to the normal, carbohydrate rich diet. But yeah, I think it's just the crossover for the general person. Then types of diets can be beneficial because it may fit with their lifestyle. But for an athlete, especially an athlete who's performing high intensity exercise, 6-7 times a week, it's just no.
That makes sense. I tell people also who I know who are not like, they're exercising kind of, but it's not like athlete. They go to the gym and try to like be healthy and stuff, and they ask me what I eat, and like, you shouldn't be eating what I'm eating. Like, it's not like the output that I have on like a training session day where I'm in the gym, I get a lift before and then activation and stuff, and then I've got like an hour and a half before training, get like some electrolytes and a protein bar in, and then I go practice for an hour and a half. It's like the amount of calories I need to get through that properly and then recover is not something that like, I'm like, yeah, don't do that. Like, what do you eat on that day? I'm like, this is what I eat, but you shouldn't do that.
It's the same thing with the post weigh and stuff for the fighter. Like the main focus on the post weigh-in period for the fighter is to get carbohydrate and fluid in. And the sports nutrition recommendations for a carbohydrate load before competition is around 10 grams per kilogram of body mass. So say you weigh 70 kilos, it's around 700 grams, and that's when the focus is getting really easy digestible carbohydrates in. So the sports drinks, the jellies, chocolate milk. But for the normal person, that's a terrible diet. But the crossover for the fighter to be optimally fueled, they're the types of food you need to get in, because it's very difficult to get 700 grams worth of carbs in potatoes into you. It's going to be very difficult to consume that. So that's when the importance of having them foods. But as I said, for the normal person, that's not a diet you recommend, but that's when the athlete crossover goes.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you see people that see these people, these athletes, and they're like, well, they're in shape, so I should just eat what they're eating. And it's like a very big, it's like I guess pet peeve of mine, where I don't, just like the way things are advertised to people, and like the Gatorades and the electrolyte drinks and all these things are like, well, if LeBron James does it, then it's healthy for everybody. And it's like, no.
These guys are expending so much energy every single day. Like they have them kind of things, but for the normal person who's sitting in an office,
the supplements are the
5,
same. The supplements are the same way. The advertising on them is so good. People think. All right. So you also, to change gears a little bit, you are a certified chef.
Yeah.
And I am not that. And so we were talking beforehand, you went to culinary school to do that. So I guess, how did you decide that you wanted to go to culinary school? Were you already doing nutrition stuff beforehand? And like, what is it like in culinary school? Like, so in my head, school and cooking is like, you're getting yelled at by Gordon Ramsay, and it's not a fun time.
This is probably the explanation that you probably wasn't expecting when I went to culinary school. So I moved to Australia in 2017, went on like a traveling visa, and I went there for 2 years. I had just finished my degree, just set up my online business, and I loved Australia, really wanted to stay, and I had no option to stay long term once my 2 years were up, and the only option was to study, and a chef in Australia is a skill over there. So I thought, well, I'll pick being a chef because that will align with the nutrition side of things, so there's something I can sort of pick out of that. So that's how I got my visa, is to go and study in Australia. So yeah, I studied in an international culinary school in Perth, which was interesting. I was the only UK person in the class. Everyone's people from India, Japan, Bhutan, Nepal. It was pretty cool to see different cultures and how they cook food, and and I think it was really important for me. What I've learned is knowing the taste of food. It's all very good giving a fighter a diet, but it's got to be enjoyable. It's got to have flavor. It's got to have taste, because eating chicken and broccoli and rice 3 times a day for 8 weeks.
It's
No
not
one's
fun.
gonna want to do it. It's boring, and then that comes into like the domino effect where you're eating a really flavorless diet, bland, boring. Your cravings for any kind of tasty food goes up. Then it comes to the weekend, your friends, your family are going on food. You're like, oh my God, I need to go. Then you go out. Then you end up having more than what you should have. And then that just is just a spiraling effect. So I think knowing flavors and knowing the importance of that helps me massively in my practice, because I'm always thinking of new dishes to enhance the fighter's experience in their fight camp meal plan.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, all right. So first day of culinary school, you go in. Well, actually, first, did you have to like apply to get in the same way that you would for university and stuff?
Yeah, I had to apply, and then I had to apply for the visa, and then
So what's the application process like for culinary school? Because it's not like you're sending in like pre-made meals or whatever, like, or are you? I don't know.
I think the thing with Australia, the student visas, I don't know if it's like in the States, but there's a big demand for student visas in Australia. They want to get people over. So you don't really have to show a lot to get into the schools, to be honest. I had my degree, I had no background, and yeah, they accepted me pretty quickly. But I was living in Sydney at the time, so I had to move because it was the cheapest place to study. So I moved to Perth, which is the equivalent of moving from I think like New York to LA in distance. So
Oh, geez.
and yeah, did that for 2.5 years.
Okay, so you get into culinary school, first day, first class. Like, what are the things that you learn in culinary school? Like, you sit down, like, are you taking notes? Are you cooking day one? Like,
The
what,
first
like,
couple of
like, how
months,
is it structured?
the first couple of months were very, very boring. Health and safety, what to wipe a surface with, like really, really basic. And especially like I've studied a master's degree. I've been in that sort of like, really science space. And to go from that to, you need to use antibacterial wipe before you use the detergent on the worktop bench, for example. It was a little bit boring. But then we got into the kitchen, and it was probably about 3 months in, then we were just cooking different dishes, and then we get scored on them, different cuisines, our knife skills. It was it was really enjoyable. But so it's split up into 2 parts. The first year is Cert 3 in commercial cookery. So that's where you basically you learn your skills. But that's for the year. But then the second year is a lot more admin based. You're not cooking in the college. It's like stock taking, the financial kind of side of things, which I thought it was pretty boring, to be honest. But the first part of it was really interesting, and definitely, especially with the different cultures in the class, just taking little tips and tricks off them, and I use some of their meals in my plans now.
How old were you when you went through that? Like, you had already got your master's and stuff?
So I finished my master's. So I didn't go to university till quite late. I was in university at 21. I finished my master's when I was 26, moved to Australia, and then moved to Australia when I was 27, and then started that about 29.
Gotcha. The reason I ask is because when I went to university, I was like 17 and graduated at 21. And then the last like couple of years, I was like, well, I almost wish that I went now, because I feel like I didn't get everything that I should have out of it. Because I mean, when you're 18, you don't know anything. Well, I still don't know anything. But when you're going through culinary school, like, the wherewithal to, or the awareness to pick up like little things from these different cultures and then how to apply them, I feel like is much more like, was that something that you went in, and as soon as you saw like who was in the classes with you, you were like, I need to like learn from that person and that person, and they use this seasoning over here, and like, that's cool? Or was it something that just like, as you're going through the classes and learning, like, so I guess like, what's like when you're doing the cooking in the school, like, what's like you go into class and then what happens? And then you're like watching everyone else do it and you're like, oh, that's cool. Or was it going in, you were like, I need to learn all these different things? Or were you just kind of like, I need to not get kicked out of the country?
I was probably pretty much glad I don't want to get kicked out of the country at first. It was, yeah, and then when you're in the class, you just see, how they use, the wok or the knife skills, and you just take them for that. And you made a good point then about learning when you're younger. Like, I think if I went to university when I was like 17, 18, I'd have been, I wouldn't have listened or learned anything. Like, I'm like my sort of journey. I finished school. I did nothing in school, left school with no grades, and then I had to go back when I was older. So that's when I went to university later. My sort of, when you're at that age, you kind of want to learn instead of like having to learn when you're younger, if that makes sense. So you sort of pick up on more things because you're older, you're a little bit wiser. But yeah, in terms of like, I wasn't like a sponge on the first day. I was like, yeah, I've got 2 years of this. I've got to make the most of it.
So what's like a normal day during like the cooking part? So you go in there and then they have like a meal that you're supposed to cook, or like how does it work?
So it would be, for example, we're going to do breads and pastries today. So we'll cook like maybe like 4 things on a ingredient list, and the teacher will show us how to do it. We'll cook it, and then sometimes we'll be paired up where we do a dish together, and then she'd mark it or rate it, or we have to do it again and stuff like that. Really, my bad thing was eggs. For some reason, every time we did an egg dish or like a boiled egg, I messed up every single time. I just don't know why. I can do them, but every time I did it in college, I just messed it up, and then I'd have to do it again, and then behind the class. But yeah, it was an interesting couple of years.
That's so funny. That teacher must have the best job. It's like trying a little bit of everybody's food as a job. Do you ever?
The good
Go
thing
ahead.
is you get to eat the food too. So once you've cooked it, you get to eat it. So I didn't have to ever bring any lunch into college.
Oh, that's nice. Do you ever watch any of those cooking shows like on like Gordon Ramsay and all them?
I went through phases of really watching the Gordon Ramsay kitchen nightmares.
So when you're watching these people, like, are you like, oh, they did that wrong, they did that wrong, they did that wrong?
My level's not. I've got the qualification. I'm a decent cook. I probably wouldn't be able to run a kitchen, but I can cook pretty. I can cook pretty good.
Yeah, there you go. I feel like if you have a level of expertise and you're watching something on TV like that, it becomes either a lot more frustrating or a lot more fun, depending on how you look at it. Because like some of the stuff, like I have no clue. I just like it's on in the background. I watch it for entertainment purposes. But like, I don't know. It's hard for me to watch soccer now to just watch it. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, dude, this like. So I want to touch a little bit as well on the online business part, because did you start it after you got to Australia or before?
Yeah, so I set it up, and then I went to Australia, and then I wasn't really earning a full-time income for probably three and a bit years, and then I started posting a little bit more, and then working, as I said, which I was working with a couple of fighters, and then it just went from recommendation.
So how did you decide that you wanted to do your own business? Because that's a difficult, like, so I've got my own like training thing, and time wise I don't really have enough to grow it, to scale it like that. And at some point, like, I have friends who have done it and they've made the leap and quit their normal jobs and made it work. But at some point, like that jump where you're like, okay, I'm gonna do this now, and I'm gonna make the jump. Where, like, was that something that you always wanted to do, or was it something that just kind of you realized that you were getting good at this and people were coming to you and you're like, oh, I could make this work? Like, where were you in that sort of scale? I'm curious, but like just for myself and my own sort of journey as well.
I think sometimes in life, when you don't have a plan B, things can kind of just happen, where I didn't really know what else. So I'd always had my degree and wanted to do something in that space, and then I set up my online business, and working with a couple of people, and then I sort of, when I was over there for a couple of years, sort of left it to the wayside a little bit. Didn't really focus on that much. Life things got in the way, and then one day I really wanted to. I thought, this is it. I need to push my business now. It's either now or never kind of thing. And I said about the plan B, and when you don't have a plan B, can push you forward a little bit more. And I remember messaging gyms and just really, really making a focused effort on, like, I thought, give myself 6 months, try my hardest. At least I can turn around and say, you know what, I gave it a go. And then once I did that, that's when I can remember the guy who like really starts off. There was a guy messaging me asking for a plan. He was doing a weight cut. We did it, and then I remember putting a post out with him weighing in. Then another fighter messaged me, same again. He weighed in, put a photo on me page, and then just went spiraling, and then to the point where I'm at now, which is pretty crazy with the guys and the guys that I work with all across the world. It's it's a pretty cool journey, and I'm very lucky to be where I'm at. Like, I'm doing a job where, like, it doesn't feel like work to me. It's
yeah. I think that's where, I would definitely love to get to that point at some point. If everything goes right for you, actually, I'll 2 more questions. First is, what's the craziest story that you've encountered or seen in all the traveling that you've done, fighters you've worked with, things you've cooked? If you had like one crazy story?
This is probably not anything to do with weight cuts or anything. I had a guy, this is recently, I had a guy, he was fighting, so Floyd Mayweather fought in Dubai a couple of months back, and I had a guy who was on that card. So I went to Dubai with him to help him with the weight cut. And he finished the fight. We were in his corner team, but we had passes, and we ended up staying ringside. And Floyd Mayweather came out, and his whole team was there. And I was stood next to Floyd Mayweather, and I sat there. I was like, I can't believe I'm 1 meter away from Floyd Mayweather. His whole entourage, his wife, his kids. I was like, in the middle of Dubai. I thought, how have I got to this? Then Jake Paul came out. Andrew Tate was there. I met Andrew Tate, Jake Paul. And I was like, during the night, I was like, I felt like an imposter. I was like, how have I ended up in this place?
Oh my God, that's crazy. What are they like? Did you meet Floyd or just Jake or Andrew?
Yeah, I met Jake, shook Andrew Tate's hand. Floyd Mayweather's wife was probably she was in the seat next to me, and I was thinking, during the moments you think, how have I ended up in this? How have I ended up in this place?
Bonkers. Are Jake and Andrew as they seem on camera, or is it like characters that they're playing?
Andrew was just very, I'd say they're pretty much what they're like on camera.
That's cool.
Because I knew I started the conversation with Andrew because he was a kickboxer, and my friend at home used to commentate on his fights when he used to fight in the UK. So the conversation started to him. I said, "Oh, do you know my friend?" And he was like, "Oh yeah," and that's how I spoke to him.
Well, I don't want to get you in trouble, so I'll ask you about him later. If everything goes all right, so last question. If everything goes great for you, perfectly, like everything goes exactly how you want it to go next 3 to 5 years, what's life looking like for you?
That's a good question, because especially the past 18 months, the growth of my business has exceeded far beyond my expectations. And I've haven't had a specific goal. I've just worked hard, gone with the flow, and things have just materialized. And I think just wanting to be one of the best people in the industry, being known as someone who's putting a good research out there and doing a good job. And I think that's when I know I've done a good job with a fighter and I've worked hard. I think in terms like money, accolades, or anything like that, nothing beats that sort of internal knowing that you've done something good. So I think just continue growing the business and being one of the best in the field. In terms of location where I'm going to be, I'm in the UK at the moment, but I could be back in Australia, could be somewhere else. But just keep on grinding for me.
Yeah, fair enough. It's been an hour and a half, dude. It's flown by. I really appreciate your time. Learned a lot. For those listening that want to find your socials or your website and stuff, where can they find those?
So best way to contact me is through my Instagram page, condition.nutrition. Should be the first person that pops up. If anyone wants to ask any questions or needs any advice, drop me a message. I'm always pretty active on there. My website's conditionnutrition.org if it's better to contact, if it's easier for them to contact me via my website. And that's pretty much it.
Sounds good. Really enjoyed it. We will see you guys next time. Peace. Peace.